and the counting processes. However, as stated above, and having observed the pre-election and the immediate post-election environment, Elog stated that it was premature then, on the 12th of August, to make an evaluation of the credibility of the elections. It further recommended that queries that had been raised both on the transmission of results and the availing of the prescribed scanned results forms to the public be addressed by the IEBC. We also advised that any disputes emanating from the process be adjudicated through the courts. So with the court ruling now in place, we are preparing for fresh presidential elections. While we await for the comprehensive report of the Supreme Court of Kenya verdict, there is a clear indication from the ruling that we will require all electoral processes to be firmly premised on the Constitution and legal provisions, transparency and verifiability. Further, IEBC will be required to properly attend to its obligations, both in the management of the election operations, but also in engagement with stakeholders on the same. Going forward, we appeal to IEBC to immediately share a clear framework on the conduct of the presidential rerun with the shortest time possible. We also appeal to the political contestants to conduct their campaigns peacefully and adhere to the electoral code of conduct and refrain from brinkmanship and careless rhetoric that could create tensions in the country. In this regard, we also take great exception with the utterances of politicians that have cast aspersions on the judges in the Supreme Court of Kenya and on the Supreme Court of Kenya ruling and the work of observers. This is our statement today. Do you want to do Kiswahili before we?
They ask.
Okay. Okay, so we'll open it up for questions and then we can do a summary in Kiswahili as well. Can I see the number of hands that? Okay.
My question, you were involved in observing the election, but now the verdict of the court is it an indictment on both the local and national observers? Because you were quick to call the election as free and credible, but now we are being told that there were so many irregularities on how the commission conducted the process. So should Kenyans expect you to give credible observation in the rerun?
Okay. Another question?
My name is Ken Kiporili. I just want to know, do you, from what the brief that the Supreme Court has given out and the registrar's report, that's the registrar's the Supreme Court, do you agree with that? And then the second question, having been tainted, courtesy of your report, do you think you have the moral authority to participate in the rerun? And finally, if you're going to do that, you mentioned the 5,000 observers and 17,000, 1,700. I don't know, would you deploy more going by what happened? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Kamal Mogo from TV. My question is, now that you are settled on the announced results, is it possible in your position as observers maybe to share with the Kenyan whether you can tell, whether you can get a complete list of all the results of the 4,800 polling stations, so as much as has been announced, maybe Kenyans have a chance from you as observers to get a breakdown. Is it possible for you to maybe share that information with us, if it has also been shared with you by IEBC?
My name is David Mwere from Day Nation. I just wanted to know what you people stand for, because last time you were here, you were so quick to tell us how you are surveying the tallied with what I said against. Now you are here, you seem to be speaking from both sides of the law. You're now saying that by that time you called for IEBC to ensure that to open up in terms of how they transmitted their results. Now, what I want to know is, what do you stand for? Are you just there? Do you serve specific interests, or are you just there to, move from one corner to another? That's my question.
My name is Rerun from Capital Media Group. Mine is on the forthcoming presidential election. Whether you're going to deploy observers to monitor the results transmission, because you've noted in your statement that that is one aspect you left.
Mm-hmm. Okay, can we speak to those? And my colleagues will also help me where I get stuck. So starting with Moses and whether this is an indictment on observers, I think it's important to understand the role that observers play, and that also, if you noticed, various observer groups gave their assessments of the various processes as they happened. So as Elog, we have been speaking from March until now on the long-term processes. We talked about mass voter registration. We talked about the party primaries. We talked about the voter register verification exercise, and on E-Day we gave 3 or 4 reports. 2 I think we gave at the same time. So we talked about opening, where we spoke to the issues that rose around opening and how well or how badly that went. We gave another report that talked about how voting went and the closing of polling stations. And then we gave, of course, the statement that is now very controversial on the results. Now, how we collected our information that led to the results is that we had observers sitting in polling stations, and these were sampled polling stations that were randomly selected but representative of the whole country. And we'll also give you a handout so that you can see how they were distributed. And they sent us SMSs that gave us results as they were announced. We went the further step of collecting Form 34As using our observers, so they either took a photo and sent to us, and we compared that. So from our analysis of comparing our results and the forms, that is how we made our projection. We did not use the portal. So it's important to understand that different observer groups have different objectives. We all want to observe the elections, but we also use different methodologies. Some have their limitations, some are better than others, some are looking at certain aspects over others. Now, what seems to have been common, I think, with all the observer reports is that E-Day went relatively well. Where the rain started to beat us was around results transmission, and largely because of the issues of the portal and accessing certain aspects of information. And so this will be speaking, I think, also to, is it Kamau or David who asked? Because I have the statement we gave on that day. In addition to giving the projections based on what we had collected from the polling stations, we did actually give 8 recommendations, including on results transmission, saying that that was beyond the scope of what we had monitored, but it was important that the process should be clear and understandable to all stakeholders, and so more work needed to be done on that area. So in addition to what do we stand for, I think we stand for our truth and what we have collected. It would not be fair to come here and say that we found different results. What we did was just share what we found up until that stage, and we're still monitoring and collecting results which we will share. We've been monitoring the court process. We've been monitoring on the ground. We still have our long-term observers. And I think also once we get a ruling from the court on what the irregularities and the illegalities are, then we can compare with all the reports that we have and see where the problem was. So that is work that is still ongoing. Then I see. So on the new presidential election, we do plan to deploy. We're still in discussions. It might not be possible to deploy to the large scale that we did before because we had planned for such a large-scale deployment. We had made a small contingency for in case there was a runoff, but that would not be enough to deploy to the scale that we had before. So we still plan to observe. We're still observing, as I've mentioned, and I think we'll be communicating with you once we are clearer on what our plan looks like for the rerun. We'll also stand guided by the framework that IEBC will give us, if IEBC is still the one running the election, on how they plan to conduct the election, but also be guided by the illegalities and the irregularities that the court has identified, because they've not given a comprehensive description of what they are. Right now, we're still speculating. Once we are clear on that, then we can also give you a clearer plan of what Elog will be doing for the presidential election. Next is
maybe an addition on whether we will continue observing the election. Yes, we are not speaking from different podiums, and I want to give an image of that. The sun rises and shines throughout the day, even if there are clouds. So it rises. We are the sun. We are telling the truth about what we observe. And based on our moral capital as faith and civil society, we want to project that image all the time. And we know sometimes it's not welcome, but we continue saying for the purposes of unveiling the truth all the time. Yes.
And I think it's important to also remember that elections observation finds its foundation in the Constitution. So under Article 81, there's a provision for election observation to be done. I think it's a key component, however much we agree or disagree, that provides for deterrence of at least minimizing the fraud that is committed, detecting fraud where it is committed, which is how we've managed to do post-election and find out some things that were not there, or pre-election, some things that went wrong. And so it's an important component of the electoral process that is not possible to do without. I don't know if anybody else has a comment.
Okay, maybe also to add, we are not shifting goals as one of you said. Okay. Also, we are not shifting goals as one of you have said, that we are credible. We are people, we stand for our truth. So what we have said is what we stand for. Our preliminaries, before that, we did it. And today, we are waiting for the verdict, and then we shall tell you the irregularities, what we said. So we are not shifting goals, we say the truth, and we stand for that.
Maybe we can take another round of questions.
There's a question you're not tackling it straight. Sorry, there's a question you're not tackling it straight on. You gave a clean debate on IEBC.
No, we didn't. No, we didn't. I have the statement here. We didn't. And in fact, I remember because we were asked the particular question on the floor on whether we said the election was free, fair, and credible. And what we said was it was too early to tell because the process was not completed. Elections are not an event, as the court has also said, and as we've also been saying as Elog. It is a process, and so you can only make you can only summarize the outcome once you have gone through the process. And at that time, we had not completed the process. The Supreme Court ruling and that whole exercise is part of the process. So we are still on the way. It becomes difficult to give a judgment on whether it is free, fair, and credible without looking at the totality from pre-election up to post-election. And we were categorical on that. Yeah.
There's a push and pull regarding who should manage the repeat election. I just wanted to know from your side, what's your reaction? How come you comment regarding that? Then another question is, as you plan to deploy your observers to oversee the Rerun, repeat election, what are you going to do different this time around?
Okay.
Thank you. You have not addressed the issue of the 4A, and I just want to...
Or the 40,000.
Yes.
Okay.
Whether you have the access. But I can make it even simpler for you to handle. You have mentioned that I also remember I brought up the issue of hacking, and the larger was that you don't have the capacity to comment on that. Now my question comes: what comment or what do you intend to do in now the election of the president? Of the contenders or the petitioner, so to speak, still argues that had the IEBC servers been opened, we would have
I'll give Kennedy, my colleague, to also speak, I think, to some of the issues you've raised. Because we were running a parallel exercise, what we worked from is the data that we collected and the forms that we collected. So like everybody else, the surplus of the Form 34As we would have to download either from the website or ask to receive them from IEBC, which we have not gotten. So we are operating from what we have collected. And what we have collected is actually available on our website, elog.or.ke. So we have both the forms, and these are just photos, the forms that were taken by the PVT observers, but also by the general observers, the extra observers that we have. You wanted to speak to? Okay. Then the ICT component, for sure, we do not have the capacity to tell whether hacking happened or not. It is not within our mandate. It is not within our expertise. But however, it raises an opportunity, I think, for future election observation missions to consider, because of the nature in which our elections are moving towards, to have a component around looking at ICT more comprehensively. The extent to which Elog engages with ICT is on monitoring media, social media, to a very small extent, for hate speech, but also participating in the Open Data Initiative, where we've pushed for access to documents around elections to be made publicly available on the website. And that is the little capacity we have. I think it's important that there's work for everybody, and everybody has a particular role to play. So for us, that is the far we can go. For those that are ICT savvy, and I was happy to see that part of the interested parties that are admitted at the court is an institute of that it deals with ICT, so the professional body of those with ICT. And I think it's important that they also start having a conversation around how they engage with elections, besides just providing the electronic equipment, but also participating in observation from that perspective. And I think that is good for them. Everybody does what they can do. And for us, what we can do is citizen observation, people at the polling stations, and monitoring those processes from that perspective. So I think, what was the other question?
I want to I can respond to whether the issue of IEBC will. I'll just speak to the mic.
All right, you've been watching a press briefing live from Elog, that is the Elections Observation Group, and they have been speaking about the Supreme Court ruling. And prior to that, there was a press briefing by Kura Yangu Sauti Yangu. They were also